Get your sweets and your drinks. I don't think the bar is open, but we have other kinds of drinks over there. And we have a sign-in sheet and a handout, and we'll get started. We'll get started because you're here on time, and we should be on time too. So thank you all for coming this evening. My name is Catherine DiMatteo. I'm a select board member in the town of Leyden and the chair of the Bernardston-Leyden region, what are we? Oh, Regional Advisory Committee. So tonight, I will be doing this presentation, and with the help of Liz Kidder. This was based on work that was done by the Collins Center, and if you were here in July, which I was not here in July, but if you were here in July, you would have met Anthony Wilson, who is the lead on this project for the Collins Center. Collins Center is based out of UMass Boston, and they do work for many of the municipalities throughout the state of Massachusetts, and we appreciate the work that they've done on this shared services feasibility study. Next slide, please. Here we are, Bernardston-Leyden Regional Advisory Committee. And I want to thank the members of the committee, and I'd like them to raise their hands or jump up when I call their name so that you know who's responsible, who will be responsible after this. Brian Herview from Bernardston, there he is. Tammy Powell, all right. Richard DeGeorge, and assisted by the wonderful Karen Kelly. In Leyden, myself, I've already introduced. Ginger Robinson, I know she's here. There she is in the back. Liz Kidder, and assisted by our wonderful town coordinator, Michelle Druso, who is over there. So again, welcome and thank you so much for coming to this second public forum. The information that the Collins Center worked with, Karen, I can go to next slide, is based on our last public forum, interviews that they had with staff and the boards and committees in both Leyden and Bernardston. They asked us for a lot of documents. I will say that the money documents that they used were from fiscal year, last fiscal year, not the current one that we're in. So if you see any numbers, you say, hey, wait a minute, that's not what the budget was for this year. The numbers it's just a roadmap or it's a template. It's a placeholder for us and placeholder for the Collins Center to begin to do their analysis work. The next steps would be to really concentrate a little more on what those numbers would say. We also did a survey, and thank you everyone who may have filled out that survey. It was out for 6 weeks, and we had quite a good response. 212 electronic and handed in responses, 113 from Bernardston and 99 from Leyden, so well represented, I think, from both towns. The survey results, which I'll go over now, were very interesting, and they led us to certain conclusions. This question was about whether we should consider spending any time on combining the two towns into one town. And the results, as you can see from either the paper in front of you or from the screen here, were that there was not really strong support. In Leyden, for instance, very strong not support. And Bernardston, more equitable in terms of, yes, people are supportive, some people were definitely the equal number not supportive, or less non-supportive and equal number that were unsure. But because overall there wasn't a really strong interest in us spending and the Collins Center spending any more time on the concept of having the two towns become one town, we decided not to move further along. So that was our decision, and for other reasons as well, that the whole consolidation process would take 4 to 5 years at least, and would require a number of steps, including a lot of voting by the towns, development of a new charter, creation of a new town, getting the state to agree to it, and also the financial impacts. Leyden again, remembering that the numbers were used as just benchmarks, but we would pay in Leyden a little less, and Bernardston would pay a little more a year in terms of property tax analysis. But again, we've thrown this off the table, but I want to keep emphasizing that the numbers we used benchmark numbers to figure this out, or I should say the Collins Center did. So, and the result of that survey really showed us that there wasn't any sense of us spending a lot more time on this particular phase of our feasibility study. So moving on, we did ask the question about, well, are you interested in shared services? Regardless if they would lower tax rate or not. And you can see here by the slide that there was much stronger support for us moving forward to support some service consolidation between the towns of Leyden and Bernardston. So there's very few no responses. Some unsure or depending on, what those shared services were, but stronger support. So that's where we've taken off from there and have decided to really concentrate on shared services. In the next slide, please. So you certainly can't read this on the screen, but you have it in front of you. We looked at 5 areas: town administration, finance department, public safety team, regulatory boards, and cultural committees, which was kind of like a big, broad dump of all the other committees that we all both have in Leyden and Bernardston. And you can see from the results of the slide, very clearly there was more support for the administrative functions, like within the town offices, and including the finance department. Also strong support for the public safety team, much less for regulatory and the cultural committee. So once again, this led us in the direction that we've decided to take, which is to look at specific shared services. But before I get into where we've narrowed it down to administration, finance, and the fire department. So having said that, I want to ask Liz Kidder to come up, and she's going to take over from here for a bit of the slides.
Kath and I are going to go back and forth on some of these. I'm doing this one. I'm a member of the advisory committee, but I have several hats in Leyden, including chair of the Police Services Advisory Committee. And I worked as the chair of the Leiden's Public Safety Committee with the Collins Center on developing the intermunicipal agreement that we have for the police department. So I've worked for about 4 years now with what's called an IMA. In looking at shared services and looking at the original grant proposal again the other night, I found a paragraph that I have spread out here on a slide that talked about why we even wanted to get into this process. And I think Jane Dutcher brought this up at the last public forum, that within a couple of years, many of the current town employees are getting ready to retire, and there's going to have to be a transition. So what's the best way to go? Many towns are having trouble finding part-time people, and there's a feeling that if you can provide a full-time position, this may be shared between two towns with benefits, you might be able to gain more sustainability with the positions. You'd really hope you'd be able to provide a competitive wage and benefit package, get people with more experience, maybe create a more cohesive work environment. And one of the goals being to provide improved efficiencies in providing services for and to the public. So that was the original grant intention. Next slide. When you get into shared services, the town will have responsibilities, whatever towns are involved. You've got to adapt and understand what a shared service is all about and how it works. You've got to create very clear job descriptions and responsibilities for that position, so there's no confusion and people don't understand or have expectations that can't be fulfilled. And two towns working together, you might have to compromise on some of the things you might want. Something as simple as how many hours in each town would that person be available to the residents in the community? You might have to adjust it back and forth and work on those issues and criteria. And you want to recognize that it can take time to achieve optimal efficiency. There's a lot to work out, and there's a transition period, and you should expect some tweaks as necessary. Next slide. And then the person who's hired has a unique position of working for a couple of towns. When I first moved to this area, there was something called the Circuit Rider program. I'm talking about a long time ago now, where the state was trying to get towns to hire staff, professional staff. And I know Leyden and Bernardston shared a town administrator, each one about half-time. I'm talking a long time ago now. Shelburne and Buckland the same, and there are a few other towns. That group of people who held those jobs still get together and visit. They have a little cult that they have that they get together and post on Facebook. So you have to learn how to work with two separate boards and expectations. And that person would have to learn the specific needs and culture of each community, what the expectations are, and establish operating procedures that serve both towns effectively. It wouldn't make sense to have different processes for processing paperwork in the two towns. May as well work out one common way of doing it. And you have to understand that if you go into a shared service, there might be a one-time implementation expense. Legal fees, technology integration, recruitment and some training costs, those kinds of things. And you have to figure out how to allocate those expenses in a way both towns find fair. I'm going to talk a little bit more about cost allocation in a few minutes. So the Collins Center looked into what kind of government models are out there within the state law. The first one is the intermunicipal agreement, an IMA, and that's what we have for police. It's something that Leyden and Bernardston are used to working on now and know how it functions. Some areas go into special regional districts, like school districts, or water and sewer districts, or Shelburne Falls has a fire district, I believe, and various towns have been looking into this option. There's South County EMS, it's 3 towns with an ambulance district. And those are separate from the town in terms of annual town budgets and voting. So once they're established, they're independent. Their budgets don't go to town meeting like the other budgets. They send out their own tax bills. I had a house in Shelburne, my mother lived there. I'd get property tax bills and then a water and sewer bill, separate. Then there's something called joint powers entity, where you're creating a separate public entity. Now, I will say, I sat down the other day and tried to read Chapter 40, Section A, 4A and a half. I still don't know what they mean, okay, or how it could apply here. That's something totally way out there that we're just not looking at. So an IMA is the simplest way to work. It requires select board approval. It has a 25-year maximum. Our police IMA has a 3-year rollover, so it automatically rolls over after 3 years if you don't make any changes. So, next slide. So what all goes into an intermunicipal agreement? I chose not to make a slide of my outline, which, if you can see, detailed all the legalese that goes into categories. But it identifies the services. So the purpose of an IMA is for one town to obtain services from another town, an intermunicipal agreement, as we do with the police. So the Bernardston Police Department provides policing services to Leyden under contract. That contract lays out how many hours they're going to be in town patrolling in Leyden. It lays out all the procedures, the hiring procedures for the staff. It has an advisory committee. There's 7 of us, many of them are here today, who meet quarterly, and we sit and we say, how's it going, Jim? And I know Jim's here, and he can answer questions later. And he goes, going well. I said, does the budget feel right? And he'll go, yup. Or he'll give us some updates like, oh, we got new tasers, or we got new training in this. And so about every 3 months, we get together, and we are now in the process, because we're coming up to the 3-year renewal time, and we've gone through every paragraph and every word of that agreement. We've come up a couple little tweaks to bring it up to date, and the committee at our next meeting is going to vote on those and make the recommendations to the select board on those tweaks, and that's all they are, and then it'll keep rolling over. It includes budget information. For example, we bought a police cruiser when we started this arrangement 3 years ago, and we agreed in that agreement, it says we are going to put money aside in a stabilization account so in 5 years we can buy Bernardston another police cruiser. So that's very clear what our responsibilities are financially. It lays out any process information on how to transition. That was in the early one. If there's a dispute resolution, there's a process in there. If we decide to end it, there's a process. There has to be, I think, a year's notice in order to allow for transition. If it ended, we would get that police cruiser back, whether it's 1 year, 3 year, or 4 years old. Leyden would get that back. So that's all laid out in an intermunicipal agreement. It also has in there if another town wanted to join in, how would we manage it? So now let's get to cost allocation. There are so many different possibilities, and each one sort of has their own way of analyzing a fair cost allocation. If you're working on some sort of shared agreement where it's really population-based, you can do it by population. That's what some IMAs in the state do. Depending upon which year you look at the population figures, we're either 24 or 25% Leyden of the population of the 2 towns. Even if we combined in some fashion or shared services, it's only 3,000 people being served, which while Leyden considers Bernardston a big town, when you talk to the state of Massachusetts, they consider towns under 20,000 people as being small towns. And that's very simple, but it doesn't always reflect actual service demand. When we came to looking at the police arrangement, Leyden is a very different town from Bernardston. We have no state highways. We have no interstate interchange. We have no commercial or industrial, or really any tourism, like, Kringle Candle was, things like that. So we came up with a hybrid method, which the Collins Center developed for us. We didn't really have good call data for the police, and so they went through a spreadsheet that's multiple interactive pages. And Jane Dutcher, your chair of finance, and Ginger, our chair of finance, went through it with the Collins Center and with Jim Palmieri and a fine-tooth comb to come up with every possible expense that Leyden should be paying a share of. And so that laid it out, and that gets reviewed, and we're reviewing it again at our next meeting to see if it's still valid, so that we ended up paying 17% of the Bernardston Police Department budget. So that's one example. I've seen an ambulance district agreement where they had 2 figures they looked at, population and call data. So they took the current population, and each of the 4 towns in that group got a percentage identified their percentage of the population. Then they looked at 5 years of call data for ambulance and did an average of the 5 years for each town. And then they worked those two, I don't get into the finance much, they melded those two numbers and figured out the cost allocation to each of those 4 towns based upon call data and population. So that's a common way of looking at some of the public safety. And one of the things, I guess that's the main thing on this slide. So in terms of where we are in looking at shared services, we would have to look at a much more detail, as Catherine said, on the finances and the details and that kind of cost allocation. Both towns have to decide how to move forward. The advisory committee will make recommendations. And this study that we're trying to wrap up now is really just the starting point for discussion. And as we said, the key assumptions on the follow-up slides were FY25 budgeted data. Things have changed since then, so if you look at it now, it might be a little bit different. And the Collins Center thought that the best way to look at it for a comparison was looking at personnel. If you're going from several part-time to trying to put in a full-time position, then you're talking about benefits. And their conservative benefits cost estimate is $26,603.64 per year per full-time employee. And even that is flexible because of what's happening with insurance. It's changing for all of our towns. And then the challenges and why we want to look at shared services, as I talked about before, sometimes, recruitment difficulties. We went through 3 interview steps to try to find a part-time town clerk and had to change the job description and the salary rate in order to find somebody. The Collins Center looked at what the going market rate is in Franklin County. And they said straight out that both towns are paying right now for most of the positions below market. And so that if we're changing staff and have to look for new people, we're going to have to think about coming up to what the going market is in order to pay those people. So next slide. So after looking at all of these issues, and I think Kath alluded to this before, we settled on asking Collins Center to look in more depth at town administration, town administrator coordinator, and town clerk, looking at the town financial team, accountant, treasurer, tax collector, and assessors, and then looking at the fire department and the public safety team. I'm going to turn it back over to Kath.
Thanks, Liz. And just a reminder, you have all these slides in front of you, and we'll take questions at the end. And we want your questions and your comments, so as we go along, you can mark on your paper anything that comes up that's either unclear or that you have some suggestions to share with us, because our work is not over yet. And we would appreciate any thoughts from this group, and we will be reaching out, I'm sure, further in the future. So we're looking at the town administrator / coordinator. Bernardston and Leyden both have a full-time person in that position, both appointed by the select board. So we're similar in that sense. And but there would not necessarily work if we had one person in that position for both towns. I think Karen and Michelle would both say, I'm done. I mean, Karen's already said that, unfortunately, for Bernardston, but they both would say, I'm done. It's way too much for us one person to do. So the options that the Collins Center looked at was to have a shared town administrator with a shared assistant and a shared part-time administrative assistant. That particular option would be quite a bit increase in terms of over the fiscal year 25 spending. The second option was to do a shared town administrator and a full-time administrative assistant. This would be a slight decrease with this kind of model. The third option would be to have a shared town administrator, a part-time assistant town administrator, and a part-time administrative assistant. And we'd see in this option the most beneficial decrease in terms of compared to the fiscal year 25 in terms of cost for the town. Again, remembering that they used about $26,000 as an average number for all benefits that they added to salaries when they were looking at this. So moving on to the next slide. So there's a number of decision points that we would have to consider, and they looked at, they being the Collins Center, job descriptions and responsibilities, work schedule, if the persons were working for both towns, how would that work? Would it be, again, a percentage of time, as Liz talked about in terms of coming to an agreement? Do you have an advisory committee that works with this shared position? How does the budget get developed? Much of what Liz had presented in terms of looking at municipal agreement. Town meetings are a big effort by the town administrators, and they would have to be scheduled so that they wouldn't overlap. They would be responsible to two different boards. And there are some examples of towns that have had shared town administrators or coordinators. Lennox and Lee, for example, did have it, and I managed to reach them to have a conversation about what had happened. And for them, the key thing was this right here, the responsibility, that this one person was responsible to two different select boards. And select boards, as you know, we don't stay around forever. Well, some people do, but mostly we turn over, we have to be elected, we can change at the whim of the citizens. So you may have, your select boards in two towns changing. They may be very different in their approaches to how towns are run, what the issues are that they feel are important. And then if there was any issue that came up, and this is what threw Lee and Lennox into a turmoil. There was an issue that both of the towns, in terms of commercial property, were engaged in and needed to make a decision about. And the two boards made completely separate decisions. The town administrator was not able to assist either of the boards in any of the work because they were split. The town administrator couldn't split themselves between loyalty or responsibility to one or of the other boards. So that was a failure on that part. I will continue to try to reach out to some of the other examples. But moving on, the Collins Center also looked at the town clerk. In Leyden, we have a part-time town clerk appointed by the select board. Bernardston, same thing, a part-time town clerk and a part-time assistant town clerk. The shared services model, they looked at one option only here, which is to move to a full-time town clerk with a part-time assistant. This would be an increase in terms of overall spending for the two towns. And again, the key considerations are similar in each case, but for the town clerk, their statutory responsibilities are the same. So a town clerk is doing much the same work, whether it's in Bernardston or in Leyden or Coleraine or Heath or wherever, because they are required by the state to manage and oversee certain things. They are responsible for the elections, and that could be a conflict again. Are the elections happening at the same time? Our federal elections always happen on the same day at the same time, where our local elections don't necessarily. But They would be managing two different sets of poll workers and et cetera. There may be some technology changes that would be needed, and there's no current examples right now in Massachusetts of shared town clerks. So if we decide to go in this direction, we would be forging a new path for the state of Massachusetts. Next slide, please. The town accountant was one of the other positions we asked the Collins Center to look at. Very different models between the two towns. Bernardston uses a professional services contract, and we have a part-time accountant. So the shared model we looked at was a full-time town accountant, and you can see that salary range there. It would be very different for Bernardston. It would be very different for us. But an alternate to an employee would be to go to a professional service contract. If that was the option if that's the path we choose, it may not be something that we actually have to share. It may be that we just, as separate towns, we just have a contract with a professional service. So these are the things we will be looking at and talking about. There is examples of Hubbardston and Templeton previously have had a shared town accountant. They don't any longer. One of the big things about accounting, and one of the reasons we have it on our priority to look at, is because it's very, very difficult to find professional accountants or individuals who have the knowledge and background even to apply for the positions in small towns, but I think across the state. This is a very common problem that many of the towns and communities are having across the state, that the requirements of this position don't have a lot of people who are going to apply for it. And particularly for someone like us in Leyden, we have a very part-time person. We don't need someone to be more than a part-time person, and we're fortunate that our town accountant has added this to her full-time job as supplemental income. But if she doesn't stay, we may be searching for a long time to find a replacement for her. So, next slide. The other position we looked at was the town treasurer and collector position. In Leyden, we have a appointed part-time treasurer and appointed part-time collector. In Bernardston, there's an elected part-time tax collector, an appointed part-time treasurer, and there's a treasurer's assistant. The Leyden and Bernardston, we don't share, but we happen to employ the same person as the part-time treasurer. So we're in a position right now where we have someone who knows both of the towns and works in both of the towns, but not as a shared person. So looking at the options again, Collins Center has looked at full-time appointed treasurer-collector and a full-time assistant treasurer-collector. This would be, as you can see, quite a large increase over our current spending. Another option would be to have a full-time and a part-time. Which would change the increase, but it would definitely be an increase. One of the big decision areas is that Bernardston would have to change from having an elected tax collector to having an appointed tax collector. And both towns would have to combine those positions as one position with that's appointed. So there's some steps along the way if this is one of the areas we decide to move forward with shared services. The town of Pepperell and Dunstable are currently sharing a position like this. And we'll try to contact them and find out what their experiences are and what kinds of considerations, pros and cons, et cetera, that they've run into. Next slide, please. Town assessor. We both have part-time assistant assessors and boards of assessors. There's special requirements for this particular position and for the boards of assessors, and this is one that they have not spent a lot of time on. There's many ways to think about this, and there seems to be more obstacles to overcome with the town, combining the town assessors. But it's not off the table quite yet in terms of what our advisory committee is doing. Next slide, please. So, with that, I'm going to turn it back to Liz, who has much more experience with fire departments than I do.
Thank you. We're lucky we have both fire chiefs here today from the fire department. The police agreement, we feel like, has been working very successfully. And we're aware of informal communication, shall we say, that have been going on for a year or so between our two fire departments on working together. About 3 or 4 years ago, we'd gotten down to one firefighter and a terribly, well, the garage's station is what it is, which is perfectly usable, but it hadn't been cleaned out in a while, shall we say, to put it politely. And we had several pieces of equipment that didn't usually start. We had one good tanker, and that was it. And that tanker was not all-wheel drive and too long a wheelbase to get to some of the properties in Leyden. So we had a chat. Glenn Caffrey, who was on the select board then, and I had a chat with Pete Shedd. And we said, what do we do? And he says, rebuild your department. And so we said, okay. And we started working on it with Stephen Foley from the Collins Center, who gave us advice. And basically said it should be turned into a fire department with a focus on first response as the primary focus for the equipment we buy and everything else. A lot of the calls in Leyden are emergency medical response calls. And so we now have, I don't know what the current count for members is, it varies periodically, so 5. It had been up to 10, but then some young guys moved out of town. And we were able to update our fleet. And now, in addition to that tanker, we have a quick attack fire truck, a first response, all-wheel drive fire truck that'll get to houses in town. We got a brand new squad, all-wheel drive pickup, brush truck, that's also the EMS unit. Through another grant, we were able to get a side-by-side UTV for search and rescue and brush fires. And we also have an old crew transport vehicle that we've made use of. And we actually brought in a dumpster, worked with Stephen Foley, and cleaned out the garage. And now the current firefighters have put in a lot of work to clean it up, get it in shape. And so we are trying to be a much better partner to mutual aid than we used to be. And I know that Bernardston has put a lot of effort into their new facility that they've taken over. They are also dual emergency medical first responders and firefighters. And they already talk a lot about working together. So there's a question of in what way we could possibly move forward with more sharing officially of services for the two departments. And both are dispatched by Shelburne Barracks, which makes it good. Next slide. So in working with Stephen Foley and the Collins Center, they basically said, you know, if you were going to do something, an IMA, like we have for police, would be the way to go in terms of a legal arrangement. There's a lot for all areas of public safety, there have been a lot more regulations from the state than there used to be. You can't necessarily do things the way you used to. You have to change. That happened with police reform for the police. And in looking at fire, you already have mutual aid working together. And so there's examples that range from just sharing a chief. Coleraine and Heath just happened to hire the same person to be their chief, part-time, and so they end up working together. And then you can also get into full districts, like we talked about before, with their own boards and managing their finances separate from the rest of town. So there are numerous examples, and there's a full range of things you can look at and how they might work together more. But there's been, informal discussions, as I said, and we're aware that our two departments seem to work well together when they do work together, and we just want to start exploring what the possibilities are. More officially is the general sense. Next slide. But one thing that needs to be understood about all shared services right now in Massachusetts is not necessarily going to be a budget decrease. The way things have moved, changes in state regulations, especially for public safety, you're really looking for efficiency of provision of services and the sustainability of the departments. And this is just not unique to Bernardston and Leyden at all. I'm part of the Emergency Management Committee in Leyden and attend meetings with the FERCOG and in West County, and you see a lot of examples of people trying to regionalize public safety services of some kind, and it's just for survival. Ambulance used to be provided by the hospital, and they're not anymore. They're now for-profit or nonprofits that have to be supported by the towns. So that's just something that has to be understood about this as we move forward. Okay?
Well, we're at the end of you having to listen to us. We're going to ask you to tell us your thoughts. And we have Jack Golden here, who's the moderator in the town of Leyden, who has agreed to moderate again this evening, who will lead us through this. But as I just want to quickly run through what happens after tonight, we will discuss what we hear from you and really dig deep into the Collins Center report. We'll look for the top priority or priorities. We'll try to come to agreement on that and then develop a plan for how to get from where we are now in one or two areas. I would assume we wouldn't take on much more than that, and present that plan to the towns, the select boards, and then take our hats off, and probably new committees would be formed similar to the police committee that developed the intramural agreement. So that's sort of where we're going from here, and I'm now turned it over to Jack.
All right. Hi, my name is Jack Golden. I'm the moderator in Leyden. And first of all, I would like to thank this committee for doing all of their work. Let's put our hands together for them. Whether you want to do this or not, they're working for us. And also, I would like to thank all of you for showing up tonight. So thank you very much for being here. Now, maybe you've taken notes about questions you have, and this would be an opportunity to ask those questions and maybe get an answer, maybe not get an answer. And also, if you have any comments or thoughts about the whole process, this would be a good time to voice them, and the committee can hear what those are. So, without further ado, if you have something you'd like to share, ask, or say, raise your hand. I and Karen will come to you. Please just tell us your name and the town you're from and share your comment or questions. So, who would like to raise their hand first? Seeing nobody, I say, let's go next door and have a, no. Here's a question here.
I would like to know what's the
Would you
difference.
just please first say
Oh,
your
everybody,
name, what
everybody
time
knows who I am,
I know that.
except you.
No, I have met you before.
I know you have. Jane Dutcher, Bernardston. And my first question,
Oh, there's more.
oh yeah,
Okay.
I would like somebody to explain to me the difference between an administrative assistant and an assistant administrator.
That's a good question. Okay. Right over here. That's a very good question.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. But I'm sure if I read the Collins Center report thoroughly, I could probably give you an answer to that question. And that's next on my list to do. Their final report will be coming to us next week. But I'm sure that they identified maybe responsibility areas that might have been made a difference between an assistant administrator and an assistant. So maybe one is very clerical, and the other is a lady in or man in waiting to take over the the other full position. I definitely will have to look,
Get an answer.
read.
And did you have another question?
Well, the same thing applies, I don't think I wrote it, oh, yes, I did, on the town assessor model, wherever that is here. You say that, the slide said that Bernardston had an assistant assessor, but she is an assessor's assistant. So I don't know how that worked in
I
their
think
analysis.
there's no difference,
No,
Jane.
there is a difference, and I know what that difference is.
Ah, well, there you
Ah.
go.
It's a matter of how much power the person has, how much responsibility the person has.
Uh-huh.
The assessor's assistant is assisting the Board of Assessors and doesn't have power of her own. And the
Okay.
assistant assessor has assigned responsibilities that are assessor category. Am I explaining that very well?
And so is it correct that you have an assistant assessor in Bernardston or an assessor's assistant? Okay. Well, that's good. My committee members, please let's make note so we can sort that out.
Any other questions, comments?
I have one more.
Nope, she's got one more. But there's one over here, too.
Take somebody else?
No, let's,
Okay. Just on the town treasurer collector, could that just start with the treasurer being shared and not have to get into the weeds of going through all the votes that are
Sure.
necessary to change from elected to appointed?
Certainly.
Because that's a multi-year process.
Yeah,
usually.
certainly.
thank you.
Thank you.
Was there a question over here somewhere? I'm coming to you.
Hi, I'm Ann Pratt from Leyden. On these different options for the positions, some of them are full-time, some of them are part-time combinations, so I'm curious, were they all considered to be able to get the job done? All three different options, which sounded like different amounts of hours of work?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yay, I had an answer.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Get over there.
Justin Duncan, Bernardston. It seems to me that the town clerk's position can't be put together. The town clerk's position can't be put together in one position because they got to run elections both towns, the same day. So I can't see how the town clerk would be combined.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Other questions, comments? Yep.
Is there any one or two?
What is your name, Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Baker from Leyden on the select board as well. Is there any one or two positions that we would be up the creek if all of a sudden they gave their notice? Can someone speak to that, Catherine?
Well, all of them. Basically, yeah. And I think Bernardston, we've got select board members from Bernardston here. I'm sure, when Karen gave her notice, you probably went home and said, oh, darn, now what? But any and all of them from at least, and as you know, from Leyden's experience, there's a lot of work to try to get someone to fill the position. And we had the experience in Leyden that we shared Northfield's, I'll make sure I get this right, assistant town clerk for a while because we did not have a town clerk and we couldn't get to a town clerk. So Northfield had an assistant clerk, and that person was able to do some work for us. And now when that person moved into her full-time position as the Northfield town clerk, then we had to spend several months and a lot of work to try to get, and we didn't have anybody during that time. So any one of these positions, but I would certainly the town coordinator, town administrator position would be completely detrimental. But how do you do that? The treasurer, tax collector leaves, all of them.
Treasurer leaves and nobody gets paid.
They get hired again. Any other questions, comments?
Right there, Emily.
Oh, Emily.
Emily Yaswinski from Leyden. Just as a point of information, I remember when we had the Northfield assistant town clerk, she handled multiple Leyden elections while the Northfield town clerk handled the Northfield elections. So that's a thing that could work out if we had a town clerk and an assistant town clerk. They could carry, between a combination of the two, both towns could be covered.
Yep. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, right over here and then right over there.
Susan Bobet from Leyden. I'm curious, the departments or the committees that we thought might merge more easily, come to find out in the survey, the towns weren't excited about that, like the Council on Aging, maybe
Correct.
merge services there, shared services, the Cultural Council, shared services, those things, in my mind, might be more easily shared, and I'm curious as to if there's any insight into why those were less optimistic in terms of the town.
Yeah, in terms of the survey results, I think we were influenced mainly by the survey results where there didn't seem to be a lot of enthusiasm for merging these volunteer boards. I think informally, there may be ways that those committees and those councils could really begin to do more together. And that's certainly on the part of the select boards, that can be urged. We can urge that. But as part of the committee, we can take another look at that. It's probably not as detailed or a high priority, and I think that was our main reasons.
Yeah, a lot of those committees can already work together. So the Bernardston Senior Center already covers Leyden by the way senior centers are set up. They're not just for their town, really, in many ways. They, when they apply for a grant, they probably include Leyden already in the population that they service. And so there are a lot, and anybody in Leyden, I have a friend in Greenfield who goes to the Bernardston Senior Center because of the cribbage group, so people come and go from the center. There didn't seem to be a need for an intermunicipal agreement to provide a service. The cultural councils who give out grants every year get grants from each town appropriates some money and they get some state grants. They can already talk to each other about grant programs they might want to jointly fund. And I believe people on the Cultural Council in Leyden have already maybe talked with people in Bernardston. I sort of heard something, but I don't know much. So it didn't seem to need an intermunicipal agreement or contract for the two towns to go into coordinating and sharing those services. If the Recreation Committee can already do joint programs. So when it came to what should we focus our, efforts on, it didn't seem like we really needed to go forward on that at this time as a committee.
All right, thank you. Did you have a question here? No, all set? Okay, right over here.
Sean McMillan from Bernardston, and I guess I'm going to kind of touch on what she was saying. I know based on a survey, I did fill out a survey, so based on that survey, I'm only speaking as a Bernardston resident, it almost feels like Bernardston wants to have this combined town kind of structure to share expenses and those kind of things. In the Leyden community is like, yeah, we only want the good stuff that'll benefit us, not the combined community part of it. So that's the part that I struggle with, as most of us have probably seen I've been here 11 years now, 12 years. Every year my taxes have increased pretty substantially, and we don't get a lot back in services. I think our police department's great. We got a lot of stuff in the town. It's awesome. But if we're going to have to give up and increase our tax base for people who don't want to be part of our town, I don't see a lot of benefit in that, myself personally.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments? We'll go back here to the cheap seats.
I'm Ginger Robinson. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee. Yeah, I want to get, I think just right offhand, I really just think you make a great point. Actually, I think that Bernardston does have you do have good services. And that Bernardston does have very good services. And I can see the point of view of the Bernardston resident to be reluctant to have increased cost when you already, say you already have a professional fire, police. You've already done a lot of work to have. So I can see that point of view. I think we'll take that in consideration.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Going once. Going twice. Let's have some dessert. That's right over here.
Okay. I just want to say that if you have an afterthought or as you think through any of these options or ideas or suggestions come to mind, please get in touch with Karen or Michelle in Leyden, and they'll get that to us. And the committee very much wants to shape what our recommendations are based on, what the needs, not only the needs of the towns, but the desires and wishes of those who live here. So thank you again for coming. We have desserts. We still have hot beverages, I'm sure. Help yourself. And again, thank you.